This is a Dauntless Media Collective podcast. Visit dauntless.fm for more content.
Hello, heathens. I'm Wild Violet.
And I'm Transvangelical.
And this is Not Safe for Worship. Here, we talk about the ethics of sex work and sexuality in general through the lens of post-religious trauma. These are deeply personal topics for us, and we strive to delve in with humor and respect, but we do discuss very sensitive and potentially triggering subjects on a regular basis. Please practice self-care and compassion. Take breaks or even stop listening if you need to. We care deeply about you and your well-being.
Well, welcome everyone to Not Safe for Worship. This week we are actually going to dust off our Bibles and look at the Proverbs 31 woman, because I feel like that was used quite a bit to teach really terrible things. So we're gonna look at it.
Among us has not felt inferior to the Proverbs 31 woman?
Yeah. And if you were like treated as a guy in church, then you were told to look for a Proverbs 31 woman, which was, I don't know, it's like upheld as the example of biblical womanhood, even though there's not a single woman in the Bible who actually does it all that is in that verse, which makes a lot of sense, which we'll get into in a minute. But the Proverbs 31 woman was never supposed to be something to be emulated.
No, and well, the fascinating thing as I was reading through this passage is that there are a couple of really great snippets in here, but the way the Proverbs 31 woman generally, to me, sounds like she's dying inside. It's not something I want to emulate.
Yeah, she's at least overworked. That's at minimum. But before we look at it, you got the full like woman, biblical womanhood instruction. So I'm curious, how was Proverbs 31 like taught to you as a perceived woman? Well, you are a woman.
Yes, perceived and actual. No, that's perfect.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember diving into this passage exactly, and it's just what I really remember clearly is so much of this language. Of course, this verse about charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who, fears the Lord will be praised. That one comes up a ton. I know that we studied the passage a few times, but I just remember these general concepts coming up all the time. I don't know if you remember the Wild at Heart captivating era. Everybody was reading these books.
I do remember that. I didn't read them because men weren't told to, read those books because they're not for men.
Wild at Heart was meant for young boys. And then they came out with Captivating. Yeah, then they came out with Captivating, which was meant for young girls. And that book talked a lot about the language used in Genesis, and the fact that when the woman was created, the word used was helpmeet. Like a mate that is a helper and meets your needs and helps you further your mission, essentially. And this was really a model. And I know that there was a lot of Proverbs 31 concepts in there, but it feels like it was just kind of this overarching, as much as I don't remember diving into specific things, I remember Proverbs 31 woman. We want to be like the Proverbs 31 woman.
So it's more of the concept.
A lot of us knew what that meant. Yeah.
The concept was sold, but not an actual like look at what that was. That's kind of how I remember it too.
As
Like,
with so much of theology.
of course. But I never read Wild at Heart. I read Every Young Man's Battle or Every Man's Battle. I didn't read. I read the adult one. Um, so that was, yeah. But I like to say that I lost Every Man's Battle.
You did. And by losing the man's battle, you won the war, in my
One
opinion.
more. Exactly. It's but yeah, yeah. So captivating. Okay, we talked about this before we started recording. I am working on a 69-day irreverent devotional. One of my like working titles for that at one point was captivating as fuck.
No, I think you should keep it. I don't know what the new
I'll use
working
that.
title might be, but that's, oh my God.
I'm sure I'll use it for something. Actually, I have a t-shirt design on Redbubble that just says captivating AF, and it's like all in like the swirly cursive letters. So
Oh my God.
people can actually go buy a t-shirt that says captivating AF.
Oh my God, we should have merch.
We do need merch.
That would be so much fun.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. The Proverbs 31 woman. I mean, contextually, we're really only looking at the last 21 verses of the chapter. But if we look at the heading, it's a queen mother, right? That's teaching this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Teaching it to King Lemuel. I think that's how you pronounce it. Lemuel.
Yep. Who knows? Lemuel. Lemuel. Like a French mule. No? Okay.
It's Lemuel.
Lemuel. I mean, that sounds
Lemuel,
better. It's fine.
Which is interesting because nobody knows who that actually is.
I know, right? Who is this King Lemuel? And it's a really interesting. This is a weird shift too, because the beginning of the passage, it's like avoid strong women, be scared, run away, and then the rest of it is like, man, we love a strong woman. I don't. It's interesting.
Because verse 3 is, do not give your strength to women or your ways that which destroy kings. Which really
right, but then in verse 11, the heart of her husband trusts in her, right? And like she girds herself with strength over here in verse 17. So this is it's an interesting, I feel like the voice changes so distinctly somewhere between verse 9 and verse 10, but this is, the entire passage theoretically is this teaching from King Lemuel's mother.
Yeah. I mean a little backstory of Proverbs. Like the enticement of women is very rarely actually used for women. It's metaphor for being enticed by other kingdoms. Is really what it is. I did a Strip Theology Thursday episode on one passage specifically, which was like, it's this passage that describes this woman that's being very seductive and like cheating on her husband while he's away and stuff, and like enticing the person in. But then it switches and it makes it clear that it's actually a metaphor for relying on other kings, and it's not actually about women. It's using a very misogynistic metaphor, but it is still a metaphor for like not relying on these foreign powers that are stronger than you that are promising like all these things if you like join them
Mhm.
in like a political unity because they're going to turn their back on you and
Right. Do
destroy
not
you and
do
take the
not
land.
yes, don't be enticed by the promise of power. Um,
Mhm.
it's a different kind of strength. That makes sense. Yeah. All right, but 10 through 31, that's really the ode to the capable wife or to the
Yep.
wise woman or to the kind of
The
depending on who you
NASB
ask.
says description of a worthy woman.
Ooh, a
So this is
worthy
a
woman.
worthy woman.
Interesting.
Uh,
I think it's really fascinating. One of the key themes of Proverbs is wisdom, and it opens with woman wisdom and then ends with woman wisdom. And, the passage in the Bible that's talking about wisdom, they just couldn't stay away from the women, like we bookended it. They knew.
so yeah,
Anyway.
actually that is super interesting also because in a lot of Jewish rabbinic teaching, it's not necessarily teaching, it's dang it, what is that word? Uh there's a specific word for it that I'm not thinking of. Anyways, they a lot of times the spirit, God's wisdom, that these are interchangeable ideas, is something to be
Mhm.
pursued like a man pursues a woman. It is something to kind of in a way lust after in like a
Mhm.
sometimes less than metaphorical way, but still like it, yeah. And
Well,
then
there's a lot. There's so much of that kind of romantic imagery in the Bible.
Mhm.
You've got, the church is the bride of Christ, and
On the wedding night specifically.
yeah, very spicy, and
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, like, and also, like you're mentioning here. So, hmm, hmm,
Mm.
just a little tidbit maybe to think on, and like, why are we beginning and ending with women when we're talking about being wise? Like, maybe also just like a little tidbit to reflect on.
Yeah, just oh.
Listen to the women in your life. But okay. So Proverbs 31 woman, so interesting. There there are so many ways to read this, right? People think of this different. This happens with all scripture when we're translating it, right? So some people might believe that this is like a picture of the perfect Israelite woman, right? And that this is something that we're supposed to strive after, and that because she is so devoted to God, that's where all of this virtue is stemming from. Um, some people would say that instead this is kind of a woman that's meant to personify, God's wisdom and his active involvement in the world, the ongoing involvement. I People talk about the idea that maybe this is referencing a prophet, which I that seems far fetched to me. um, and then there's the interesting commentary I read a little bit about this idea that it kind of she's taking on a lot of the tasks of a king.
Yeah.
And so the idea that perhaps this is kind of like this woman of the household is is in her social context, she's kind of replacing the vanished monarchy as the ruler of the home almost. I thought that was an interesting take.
That that's an interesting take. Like in a lot of ways, I agree with it, but it sounds like at that end, it like switches it back to being a little patriarchal still.
Well, and it is
um,
patriarchal. I mean, if we look
yeah,
at It's really interesting because, of course, we're talking about this, like, very enterprising woman and who's so capable and who's doing all this stuff, and then, of course, in verse 23, we have to interject, though, but her husband is known at the city gates, and, like, he takes
And
his
that's
seat among the elders, but she's back there,
yeah.
like, making linen garments, and at the end, it's, "Would you give her a share in the fruit of her hands? Let her works praise her in the city gate." Like, it's like, yeah, she's doing all this shit, but, like, in verse 23, we just have to remind you that her husband is the important one. Like,
Yeah, her
still
husband
effacing.
but basically, like, because she buys property, starts a vineyard, she becomes her own, like, businesswoman, which buying property isn't these are things that are
That men do in
bend
this
gender
culture.
norm. Yeah,
Mhm.
this is not a woman's role in the culture. And so not only is she doing like the stereotypical female role, she's also doing the stereotypical male role.
And
And
these
then her
aren't,
husband gets all of the recognition.
of course, and these aren't private roles either, like, to go out
They're
and to
not. No.
buy land and to grow a vineyard and to be selling linen garments and to be supplying merchants with sashes, like, all of these things that she's doing, they're very public things. Um, Again, we talked about, is this meant to be a passage to be emulated? Could this even have been emulated? You would know more about the historical context, but how far could a woman? I mean, could she go and buy land without her husband? Is that even feasible?
It's yeah, okay, if she's married, probably not really because the wealth wouldn't belong to her. So
And if she's
she
not
couldn't
married,
just
then it would be her father
she
or
could if she
brother,
wasn't
or
married.
right?
There are some like cultural context, cultural things where if like a father dies, then daughters can get at least part of an inheritance, and so they could be unmarried with some property or with some wealth. It would be super rare because, as we've talked about, like women are seen as property and are meant to be married off. And if she ever got married after that fact, what she owns would then become her husband's.
So in the working classes, though, if a woman did have some sort of enterprise of her own and was not married, whether she was linked to her family or not, theoretically, would that money be hers? Or does it belong to your family unless you're just completely unattached?
It's hard to say completely for certain. Um, Generally speaking, it's not your money unless you're completely unattached.
Okay.
Um, that
Dad's
doesn't
gotta
mean that
die.
like
You have to be unmarried.
yeah, I mean that doesn't mean that people didn't make it by. Like we actually see in the Bible that independent women do things on their own. Like
Mhm.
Deborah became a literal general and a judge. Like she clearly was able to break out of some gender stereotypes there. But especially once you've made it through the establishment of the kingdom and you have more solidified cultural expectations, plus the influence of larger civilizations like Babylon and Persia, which are gaining more cultural influence in the area, a lot of a lot of the cultural norms are going to be solidified by the time that this is written, as opposed to like when Deborah was there, when Canaan was almost entirely not. It wasn't didn't have an overarching ruler. It was just this area of land with a bunch of basically city states. But
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, the history makes a difference. I think the nature of the literature probably also should make a difference in how we read this. And again, you had mentioned, this wasn't necessarily something that was meant to be emulated. And the Proverbs, these are poetry, and so I'm guessing that there is an unliteral meaning underneath of this that we're missing when we just read this as some sort of a guide. Actually, this is an acrostic poem, right? The Each line begins with a successive letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Is that right?
Oh, I don't actually know. Let
I
me
want to
look at that.
say that Proverbs 31 maybe. So
Okay.
so again, when you're following a literary form like that, you're going to end up with a lot of figurative language, I would imagine.
There's bet. Yeah, actually, it does. I didn't know this. I should have known this, but I did not.
You can't know everything.
I can know everything.
No, listen, I'm autistic. I can know everything about one thing at a time, personally. Yeah,
Sorry,
so
I'm
I'm
looking through
sure
the
that
alphabet.
I'm guessing the way that it is written is just really, really affects how it needs to be read. And I myself do not read Hebrew. So I can't say that much about the original language here, but I'm guessing that you can give us more context on, so you said wasn't something to be emulated, on what it actually was.
Yeah. So specifically to Proverbs 31, I'm not. The poetry is so difficult, uh, because especially if we come from a literalistic understanding of Scripture, which most people that were raised evangelical have. But a general rule that I go by: if it's poetry, do not make theology from it. So
This is
if you're
so okay,
looking,
this is so important. While we're on this topic, let's just go ahead and like dive into this topic for a minute because anytime we look at a biblical passage, I feel like this is so important to know. Y'all, the Bible was not all written in one day by the same person, and it's not all the same genre. There are different books, and when we say books, we do mean books. So we've got
Mhm.
poetry, we have apocryphal books, we have history, we have genealogy, and you don't read a genealogy the same way you read poetry. It's very, very important, I think, to kind of get some context behind what you're looking at if you really want to dig into what this says about practical theology. It's fine to read this as a poem and be like, oh, that's lovely. But if we're going to actually try and take this, like Christianity has for so many years, and apply it to a woman and be like, this is what a godly woman should look like, well, okay, we need to take a few more steps, I think, to understand what we're reading and what's actually being said. And so that's really important context that we are in a book right now of poetry. And
Mhm.
the main focus of this book is wisdom versus folly, and there's a lot of symbolism in poetry. There's a lot going on under the surface. So anytime you're looking at any serious theological study, I think that's really important. Know what you're reading. So tell us
Yeah.
more about the poem.
So
What do
poetry
you think they're
wise,
trying to do?
um, sorry, little break there because I'm collecting my thoughts, which isn't
Absolutely.
necessarily the best for podcasting
It's
with
great.
long breaks.
We are very much a conversational style podcast. We think about things before we get on here, but then I love to surprise her with questions like, what do you think they're trying to do? As if that's just like such a flippant, easy thing to answer. So take your time. Would you like some thinking music? Da na 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 na
Yeah, that
na.
that's definitely it. Um, yeah, so I think in a lot of ways, like because this is going to be my own interpretation. I don't know anybody else who has this understanding. So, well, we'll do with that what we will. No, maybe I'm the only one that's right. Probably not, but
It could be.
because because uh because there is a motif of like being seduced by women and things like that throughout the book of Proverbs, and they're all used they're almost entirely used metaphorically, right? um Sometimes that's harder to see than other times because we have been given interpretations that want to take things literal. But this is a wisdom book. It's not most of the time when it talks about a subject, it's not actually talking about that subject. You're supposed to apply
There's
it to
a
something else.
there is a thing behind the thing.
Mhm. So, in my my personal kind of belief on this is like this is a reframing of like the things that you're supposed to like kind of pursue yourself. You're supposed to pursue things that will lead to you being respected at the gate, right? In its own words, but like
Yeah.
things that are supposed to be uh that are something that's actually worth like pursuing. Like she extends her hand to the poor, she stretches out her hands to the needy. Like this is supposed to be an understanding of things that we're supposed to pursue that are like generally good things. Being able to like do a business thing and have it expand, like she buys a field and plants a vineyard, right? Like these are just kind of things that are helpful towards you, especially in an ancient context of like trying to pursue things that are actually beneficial and not trying to pursue power, because a lot of what Proverbs is about is pursuing power. And so in a lot of ways it's not necessarily supposed to be uh like finding this ideal woman per se. It's about seeking wisdom and having an intimate relationship with wisdom in a way that actually is beneficial for you, and not just seeking power, which is what women represent elsewhere in Proverbs. So
And I'm sure that someone probably has come up with this before, but it's definitely not one that I've heard. And I think makes some sense, fits for me. These are all separate things that we could aspire to, but not necessarily a picture of what you have to be as a whole
oh no.
human. And I think it is really, really important to note that yes, they talk about the idea that she girds herself with strength, but that can also be seen. Well, it is. I'm sure a lot of that has to do with moral strength and not just physical strength. And she perceives that her merchandise is profitable. She looks well to the ways of her household. Like this is a woman who she believes that she's capable. She's minding the ways of her household. She's caring for the people around her. She's not obsessed with power. Her husband's the one who's known at the city gates. What she's doing is opening her hands to the poor and reaching out her hands to the needy. Like those are vital aspects of this as well. And I I don't know. I don't think it's just about you got to get up while it's still dark and bake that bread for your husband at all, but this kind of paints a
Definitely. Yeah.
picture instead of someone who is maybe trapped in a context because they painted it as a female, trapped in a context where you don't have the power. She doesn't have the
Mhm.
power, but this is what it looks like to be a morally powerful, I suppose, woman. Some pieces of that, or just person
Yeah.
in general. And I assume typically they use when we translate scripture, there's this when we're talking about people in general, there's that bent towards the masculine. And I wonder if, kind of harkening back to your translation here, if the reason that maybe they used the picture of a woman is because she is the one in culture who has less power. And the whole point of this is that wisdom is more important than power. And so, yes, even men can put themselves in these shoes. These are things to seek, um, to be humble. I wonder. I
Yeah,
wonder why the choice
uh,
to refer to the wise woman at the end of the passage, because we joke about that, like, yeah, women are wise and everything, but this choice is interesting.
I mean, I think literarily because they've spent 30 chapters worth like showing women in kind of a negative light, that it's like, okay, now that you've learned everything that you're not supposed to do, we're going to use a similar metaphor to tell you the things that you're supposed to pursue, which
Mm.
is this list of very culturally dependent things. Like if we were to remake this today, it would be a list of a lot of different things. But it's still like, it's kind of like this weird contrast of the reason women were used metaphorically in the first 30 chapters was a lot because they were they were the marginalized group in the society, and so they're easy to punch down on. And then it's kind of keeping in that spirit uh in chapter 31 to like keep using this marginalized group, but at the same time it does switch the perspective of the reader, because they themselves are supposed to be pursuing that which is seen as the marginalized task, which goes contrary to kind of what they probably would have expected, which is that they're supposed to pursue the masculine, like powerful thing, and then to end it with it's kind of like 30 chapters saying don't pursue these negative feminine things, and then at the very end what you should do is pursue these positive feminine things. So it's I do think that it might actually be playing on the misogynistic understanding of men and women in the time, and the author just
Yes.
like, yeah, women are bad, women are bad, women are bad, oh here, follow women. And it's kind of like this twist. It's kind of a twist ending that the original audience doesn't necessarily see coming.
It
Um,
is a huge twist, and that's why
yeah,
that's why I wonder about I was wondering about that too, because they're flipping the power role. I wonder if that's very much the point. Interesting.
yeah,
Interesting. But if you are using this as a model, think about the Proverbs 31 woman. Like, close your eyes for a moment and imagine this lifestyle. In case you haven't read the passage, this might be important context. So go ahead. Let's just put yourself in her place. This is the NRSV, New Revised Standard Version. A capable wife who can find. She is far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and works with willing hands. She's like the ships of the merchant. She brings her food from far away. She rises while it is still night and provides food for her household and tasks for her servant girls. She considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hands, she plants a vineyard. She girds herself with strength and makes her arms strong. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Her lamp does not go out at night. She puts her hands to the distaff and her hands hold the spindle. She opens her hands to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. She's doing a lot of stuff with her hands. It doesn't
she
say
is
that in the, but
very
that's
handsy.
my inner Jackson.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's very handsy. She is not afraid for her household when it snows, for all her household are clothed in crimson. She makes herself coverings. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Her husband is known in the city gates, taking his seat among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them. She supplies the merchants with sashes. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs at the time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her happy, her husband too, and he praises her. Many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her a share in the fruit of her hands, and let her works praise her in the city gates.
So
I
let's
feel like I just had a nightmare though, if this was really
oh,
my,
yeah.
and then meantime my children are just rising up and calling me happy, and I'm like, I don't know if that's what this feeling is.
No, yeah, that's not the feeling. But so let's just take a moment and let's look at this through the evangelical lens of this is meant to be taken literal, right? Where every woman is supposed to do this. uh th- Something that should be glaring is just the fact that her husband does nothing. Her husband is doing nothing and reaping the benefits of it, which is really problematic if that is the way that we want to understand this, because
But
she
that is the way
that is
that modern evangelicals want to understand it.
yeah, that's true. Something that's
Mhm.
interesting to me is that verse that says her prophets are good, or however your translation said, because
She
the
perceives
Hebrew
that her
word
merchandise is profitable.
is profitable. The Hebrew word actually means like trade. It's not just like what she's selling. It's like literally people um traveling to buy stuff from her. Uh which is interesting because that would mean that she is probably breaking the Billy Graham rule, right? Because she most likely is selling to men, and
Ooh.
which is not unheard of per se in the first century, but it's like she's a landowner, but she also is like dealing with trade and stuff. But yeah, if this is meant to be taken literal, like this woman doesn't have a life. She's doing her job, um, like her cultural job in the home, and she's doing her husband's job. She is running at least one business, probably two, and then just like raising her kids in a way where they all think that she's happy, which raising kids is stressful. Like it's not an easy thing. Dude,
Well,
it
we're
just
talking about raising kids, owning land, planting food, gathering food, cooking the food, making linens, supplying them to merchants, selling things, um, getting up while it's still night, like leading her husband. Her husband trusts her. Um, j- she brings her food from far away. She gives tasks out to the household. She's got the full agenda. Like, she's providing all the food. She's like, this is, and we're not talking about a culture where she can run down to the grocery store to provide the food. It says she brings her food from far away, and I'm she couldn't just go hop in the Prius either. We're talking
yeah,
about things that take time. How this is not a 24-hour a day, you know this, this is not how time works. And you know things poetry doesn't have to follow a logical timeline. um but if we try to
yeah,
take this
but
literally, no one
yeah,
no one
it's so far fetched that it's meant to be hyperbole. Like
Mhm.
that is how we're supposed to understand it. And the author literally goes out of their way to like you're not supposed to take it literal because it is impossible to do all of these things. So if the author knows that and the author is like this is impossible, then we are not as the reader supposed to take it literal.
Mhm.
It's supposed to be metaphorical. Um, I think from there, so after you read through it, there is one verse that I think was quoted quite often, um, which is, let's see, what's the most common way that it's
Charm
is the
is
NIV?
deceitful and beauty is
Yeah,
fleeting,
char- yeah, that one. Um,
but a woman who
the
fears the Lord
interest,
shall be praised.
yeah, the weird thing is the word charm there doesn't mean charm; it means grace or favor. Like
Mm.
it's the same word for like uh God having grace on Noah and not killing his family. So it's
Okay.
yeah, it's really weird. That because that's a positive thing. I don't understand why that word is being used
Why
whenever
that would Well, maybe they got stuck with their acrostic poem. They were like, "God damn it, what rhymes with orange?" And this is what we
Let's
got.
see.
Charm. I don't know. I don't know.
I mean, the word that it starts with is sheper, which it's a shin. So I don't know, but that's a verb. I don't know why they had chose that noun. It doesn't matter. Basically, it's saying like favor is deceitful, which it in an essence that's like what we see with Donald Trump whenever he like supports somebody, but then like once as soon as they don't do what he says, like they're dead to him. Like this is what that means. That favor is a lie. um
Yeah, which really goes
which
back to the beginning of the chapter. We talked about, not giving your strength and your power away to other rulers, to other entities, not trusting the promise of power and favor, because it's not always real.
it's fake. It's literally a
Usually
lie
not.
according to this text. It's not
Yeah.
charm. So it's not like um being a nice person is what is wrong here. But yeah,
Mm.
I think that this is literally like at the very end, it's just like referencing back to the idea that these things that like quote seduce you into like following political leaders, which was a big thing, in the ancient Near East, like following their perceived favor is a lie. So don't give into it. It's just when you start looking at the connections between this passage and the other parts of Proverbs, like it really starts to break down that this wasn't meant to be an ideal woman. It's meant for ancient Near Eastern people to reflect on political power, and especially since it's literally given to the king, whoever King Lemuel is, and this is supposed to be wisdom that his mom taught him, in essence, to lead. Like that is the context. Like he doesn't need a wife that does these things. He's already the king. So a mother telling a king like go look for this type of wife, he's probably going to have multiple wives. Like that's not what's going on. Like finding the right wife isn't actually what he's thinking about.
Hmm. Well, and so much of these are king's duties.
Yeah, absolutely. Like taking care of the poor and the needy,
Hmm.
making sure that your trade that your nation needs to survive is like good, um being respected by people so you don't get assassinated. Like yeah, these are a lot
Important.
of these are kingly traits, or ideally kingly traits.
Absolutely. Sorry if you can hear me turning pages over here. Just um
Vi is
yeah.
like the only person I know that has a physical copy of the Bible.
I used to have like 10. Legit,
Oh, I'm sure.
when I hyperfixate on something. Also, when I went to college, it seemed like every different class, the professor was like, you have
Mhm.
to have this Bible, you have to have this one. I kept them for the longest time. And then I would just decide that I wanted a new version, or that one looks cool. It has different notes in it. And I had so many Bibles. I literally had to go. I got this copy right here from a thrift store, like relatively recently, or no, a used bookstore. Anyway, I, I I got rid of all of them because I was like, well, I don't do the Bible anymore. And now I'm doing the Bible again. So
At least every once in a while.
I love a physical copy. I like to make notes, and I like that the pages smell like a book. And I'm real nerdy about my paper copies of everything.
But a paper Bible, you can't just easily go look at the Hebrew and go back and back and forth between the two.
But I don't know what the Hebrew says.
That's fair. I'm just hyper nerdy that way, I guess.
I love that. I kind of wish that I had taken some biblical languages in college, but I got my minor in Spanish, actually, and I just didn't have a lot of extra time.
That's fair.
Yeah.
One of my
Not that I
first
remember
like
how to speak it.
one of my first photo shoots after starting OnlyFans was one with it's one with a Bible, but it's actually not. It just looks like a Bible. It's actually a commentary on like the book of Peter or something that I had found that I just still had, but it looked enough like a Bible that it's kind of blurred the front cover of it a little bit.
So, when's your birthday? Well, you don't have to tell us your birth date. That would be a lot. You know what? I'll send you a Bible for Christmas. You're gonna forget about this conversation, and one day in December, a Bible's just gonna randomly show up at your house, and you're gonna think the Lord has spoken, but it was probably just me.
It's probably just you sending me Bibles.
Yeah, and if you would
Can
like
I-
to consider me God, I have no problem with blasphemy. So here we are.
Just as long as you send me like the World English Bible, because that at least has the Apocrypha and the Deuterocanonical books in it.
Yeah, like my
That's-
little guy here.
yeah, you have a
Well,
good one.
it's actually not a little guy. This is a big guy. She's chunky,
Yeah, it's big.
people. This
Yeah.
is how I like my Bibles. If I put this in my backpack, I want it to actually break my back. I'm taking up my cross, y'all. The yoke is not
There we go.
easy. The mantle is not light.
Did I tell you that I was working with our Bible app to release a Bible? I don't know. I don't think it's going to happen. But remember when Trump did the the Trump authorized Bible, the Trump Bible that had like the King James version and then God Bless America, like handwritten in it, plus I think the Constitution and the Bill of Rights was all in one book.
The Word of
and
God,
so-
the Constitution. What?
You don't remember that? That was like,
I mean, I did yeah, but it still gives me the what?
yeah, it's still super, it's super weird. Anyways,
And I guess maybe I didn't know that the whole Bill of Rights and Constitution was in there too. I don't. That's a
no,
lot.
it was.
I knew he
yeah.
went straight for the King James. That, of course.
Yeah, I mean it's open. It's public domain, so it's really easy to do. Anyways, I took that idea and what did I? Oh yeah, because it was called God Bless America Bible, right?
Yeah.
And so I did the God. Ah, damn it! What was it? I don't remember. I had a title for it, but it was the World English Bible. Yeah, the World English Bible with the entire Apocrypha Deuterocanonical. And then instead of like the Bill of Rights, because there's the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, and then the calling it a hymn, which is problematic. But the hymn, God Bless America.
Wow.
Yeah, that's okay. Anyways, so full Bible, instead of the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, I had dang it, what was it? Oh, I had the Black Bill of Rights, which was written in 1920 something. It was right, maybe it's 40s. It was after one of the world wars where there was, oh no, it was right after World War II. Whenever like Black people in the United States were like, hey, we fought for the United States against Nazi Germany, and now we're coming home and realizing that home is basically the same as Nazi Germany, but just for Black people, which is kind of a rough realization to have fought a war and then came back to live in what you fought against. But
Mm.
they wrote the Black Bill of Rights, or maybe it was the African American Bill of Rights. I don't remember the language for the time. Then also um, Frederick Douglass's 4th of July speech
Oh my God.
titled "What is the 4th of July to the Slave?" or something like that, and
So
it's
good.
rips into the United States
Yeah.
just
You
so
may
much, and
rejoice,
it's
but I must mourn this 4th of
yeah,
July. Like, it's so good.
it's so good. And then instead of instead of God Bless America, I put in the Black national anthem,
Ye
raise every voice and sing.
Yes. Every voice and sing. Oh, so good. Sorry, I just, like,
So
every time I just the have you watched the Homecoming documentary?
I haven't, no.
Oh my gosh, Beyoncé at Coachella, and when she said, like, I just get chills, like, every time. She's so great. I'm obsessed with her. It's fine. Um, Someone tell Beyoncé to sponsor us.
There we go. Yes, Beyonce, if you're listening, please sponsor us.
Can you imagine? That's what Beyoncé's doing with her free time. Never. Ugh, okay, so this is I think the biggest I don't know, the biggest thing that I'm getting out of this is, like, y'all stop taking it so literally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I made somebody really mad once by saying, "You should never get theology from the Psalms," and there's so many people who will look to Psalms for theology. Like, that's
Mhm.
one of our biggest, you know, pro-life things is you knit me together in the womb, and that's supposed to make us, um, you know, pro-life. But
Mhm.
if you're using that psalm to come to a theological conclusion about abortion, then why aren't you also playing like an equal verse because it's in the same book, it's still in the same context, is happy is he who dashes your little ones against the rocks. Like, that's literally in the Psalms.
Oh, damn. I mean, it's true. It's really true. The way that we wanna pick and choose to reinforce beliefs that we already have. Ugh, yeah. Yep. And the
Yeah.
Psalms, the the other thing is that a lot of scripture is a case study on what not to do,
Mhm.
actually. And sometimes people read passages as instructional that were were not meant to be read that way at all. And the people of that time period would have understood that very clearly. That, like, oh, this is bad, actually.
Yeah.
They're painting a
I mean,
picture.
we talked about that in the whenever we talked about David saying that the only person he sinned against was God when
Yep.
he had literally raped somebody and murdered her husband. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
that's not true, like at all.
Mm-mm.
Um, but like Psalms are not supposed to be taken as theological trees. They are meant to be understood as a person's emotional state put to words at the time that they wrote it, because
Mm-hmm.
it is poetry or
Music,
lyrics to
or
a
yeah.
song. Like, it's we're,
I mean, this
we
is like
shouldn't.
what we're saying is this is the Alanis Morissette of the Bible.
Yeah.
And you like that's not that is like it's this portion, some of the portions of the Bible we can really see them as art, right? Like this was a literary device, this was an art form, this was expression of these people. It's a snapshot of a time, of a culture, of an emotion, of an event, of these characters, whatever. But it's just that it's a snapshot, it's a lyric, it's a song at a time, it's a poem. It's and think about, like, Edgar Allan Poe, and, like, I mean, think about art and poetry, and it's supposed to say things about the darkest parts of human existence as well. And we're supposed to be able to relate to it on a few different visceral levels and then translate that for ourselves. And that's the problem, is it's really difficult for us to translate these things for ourselves because we are so far removed from the original text. And I really like, I hate that I'm that person that's like, but it's like you
You're
have to
right
study
now.
it before
Right
you
now,
can speak on it. But also,
yeah.
I'm just like, listen, okay, let's come back to this passage with like some context and some understanding of the culture, some understanding of the literary form, some understanding of the language, and then let's revisit this passage in the ways that you're applying it to your life today, because perhaps that's not what it was talking about at all.
Yeah.
Most
I
of the
love that
time
you're
it's
the
not,
atheist
because
that,
it could, like, the Bible could not possibly comment on what was going to happen in 2024 unless we're talking about some like serious fucking dystopian literature. Like, then it would be like the 1984 of its time, right? Like, most of this
yeah.
isn't about 2024. It was written to those people in that time,
Mhm.
not to us
Which,
in
which,
2024. And we're
if
still trying
we,
to apply it to our lives. And I'm not saying that there's nothing good in there, but it was not written to you. It just wasn't.
well, it wasn't
Not to
meant
our
to be
culture.
understood like literally to our context today. It was meant like, even in the context that it was written to be pieces of wisdom to like think through and to apply to your own like personal context. It's not actually it was not actually meant to be like an instruction book for like dealing with every single problem. It's wisdom,
Mm-hmm.
which is common with Eastern religions, which it is. It's not actually a Western religion, as much as what Christianity is today is a Western religion. That part is confusing. We we have a Western religion that uses an Eastern religion's book,
Well, yes, we
which
really do. And we're trying
yeah,
to like, white Jesus is a real problem, right? Like, the
it
fact
is.
that we think that this is all for us and that God is speaking directly to us. Like, I used to do that thing when I was having a hard day and I would just like flip open my Bible and point and be like, Jesus is giving me this verse, right? And I like, what?
Absolutely.
What? I don't think that like Paul was actually thinking about you at all when he wrote that.
Mhm.
And scripture itself does not say that it is meant to be a literal manual. It does not say that it is without error or without negative examples. It simply says that it's God breathed, which means inspired, and that it's useful for teaching. That's
It means it's
that's what the
living.
Bible says about itself,
Yeah.
for teaching, for living, for whatever. And this is it's really, it's even the books that are instructional are not, there's a thing behind the thing. I mean, if when Jesus
Mhm.
is asked to sum up the law, he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, love your neighbor as yourself. When Paul is referring back to the law, he's saying it was given partially so that you could understand that you are not God and you can't live up to it, and you need Jesus and you need something else and you need humility. Like, even the instructional books, some of them were written uh quite a few as covenants, and this was like
Mhm.
legal language that they would have understood, that it's like a binding relationship with God, a thing that they would have looked at this structure and been like, I recognize this, like, but we don't. And
Yeah.
I don't know, that's, I just think even when it is instructional, there is something else happening underneath of it, and there's a heart behind it. And I think when we take that out and we want to look at it as some sort of like handbook for modern life, we are completely missing the point.
Absolutely. And currently currently Christians have Violet defending the Bible, even though she's an atheist. That is how bad. That is how bad Christians use the Bible. That Violet has to come out of retirement to defend
Oh,
what the
you
Bible's
know,
meant to be used for.
But that's the thing. That's why I'm here, right? Because for so long I was like, listen, I'm an atheist now. Like, what do I have to say about this? I've got all of this knowledge in my mind that I don't even feel. I don't. It used to be a special interest. Now I don't even feel like I can think about it or tap into it. What's the use of this if I don't believe in any of it anymore? But then I looked around and I was like, there are a lot of people who do believe in this, or a lot of people who are on the fence, or a lot of people who are deconverting or trying to figure out a way to believe in this, to mesh it with um an actual like ethical way of living and more liberal politics. And like Jesus was a radical, so you can absolutely do that. The thing is, I may not believe the things that scripture says, but I do believe that there is a harmful way to use it. And
Mhm.
like with most other forms of spirituality, there is also maybe an individual personal way that if you read this through the lens of like what it was actually meant to be, you might be able to get something out of here. And what I'm really cautioning against is that thing that we do where we want to take this book and read it and then make our own version of God. That
And then weaponize it.
which is what we're doing anyway. I mean, we have to some extent, but we want to really we already have an idea in our head about who is other and who is with us. And we want to use this thing, a lot of it, which was again a case study on what not to do, and apply it in really harmful ways. So I think that if for me, I may not look at the Bible as everything it says is true. I don't take it as literal, but I do see that there's history in here, that there's poetry in here, and so if we're going to look at it, I'm going to look at it as a historical book, and I'm going to say we need to read this right. And I may not agree with everything that they said in here, but let's at least get our approach right before we start arguing with the text. I think that I don't know. I guess
Yeah.
it's still a special interest a little bit. She can't shake it. And now it's more like, okay, how do we reread this, and what are the harmful things that Christians are doing with this that maybe we don't
Mhm.
have to do? If you want to still use scripture in your life, in your study, in your whatever, like maybe you don't have to do with it all the really harmful bullshit.
Yeah,
Maybe?
and that's maybe and that's kind of the thing is once you start realizing that it wasn't supposed to be used this way and that it's actually harmful to use it this way, that that's where like a lot of that's where a lot of growth can happen. But also it's so much more interesting to like deal with the possibilities of what could be going on instead of like this very strict, like mostly harmful view of you have to read it this way or you're going to burn in hell or whatever. Like
Right. And that
there's
is
some
not
really interesting things.
it's really important to know that not all Christians believe that either. I think that's the other thing. I still have Christian friends. And so while I may not believe everything that's being said in here, there are people in my life that I have seen apply this in really healthy ways, that looked at Jesus and was like, oh no, he's a feminist and a radical. And actually, I understand the context behind what they're saying about homosexuality. And I have friends who are allies. Like the first person that I was like, I think I might be gayer than I thought. And what if I'm a terrible person? I'm going to tear my life apart, blah, 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 blah. She was a pastor. And she was the person who looked at me and was like, well, history would suggest, first of all, that that's not true, the horrible person thing. And second of all, what would you tell a dear friend who came to you and said the exact same things that you just said to me? And I just started bawling, and I said that love isn't love if you have to pretend to be someone else to get it. And she was like, I've got friends who are allies who helped me come to terms with my queerness, who I cried with and drank wine with when Donald Trump was elected as president, who are pro-abortion, who are really active. And then of course there's you, Alicia, like you're still working with scripture as well, and you would still call yourself a Christian, and you're really advancing. In my mind, I still have this kind of distinction between like quote unquote good Christians and bad Christians, right? And there's like the uber conservative ones that are just taking all of the harmful bits and running with it. And I think that in general, in the religion like the morality steeped thing and the church thing, I don't really know if I believe that there is a healthy way to do that. But on an individual level, if you're gonna believe in this God, just please try to actually think critically and read and understand the nuance and hold all of this with an open hand, with the understanding that this was written for a different culture and a different time and a different context. And while you may be able to get a little bit out of this, most of what it is just like a spiritual book. It's like it's poetry, it's history, it's a lot of it was oral tradition before it was written for most of the Old Testament. It's stories, it's tradition, it's the things that you tell your kids around the campfire. This isn't just be careful how you read it, please, if you're going to read it. That's all.
Well, we are at the
Don't
end
use
of our
it as a
time.
weapon.
Yeah, these are the summaries for this episode. Don't use the Bible as a weapon, and don't try to be a Proverbs 31 wife, because you weren't supposed to. You weren't supposed to
No,
be that person.
you weren't, but do be like handsy. That's a good
Yes,
quality.
definitely
I
be
think that she
handsy
had. Be as
if
handsy as
that's your
the
thing.
Proverbs 31 woman. Right, only with consent, obviously.
Yeah.
We love a good set of hands there. And also do be concerned about the people around you, right? She was caring for the poor, she was compassionate. Do be just as concerned about them as you are about power and enterprise and all of that. So you know, worry about yourself first, but also worry about other humans. And I think that's the good stuff that we can take from her.
Yeah, it's the good stuff. Well, thank you
All right.
everyone for listening in. We will catch you on the next episode.
Can't wait. Stay sacrilegious.
I'm Priska, and I'm here to put a new podcast on your radar. Welcome to The Horny Chapel, a limited series podcast where Scott Okamoto and I dive headfirst into the wild, wild world of evangelical purity culture. In each episode, we discuss purity culture in detail, highlighting both its absurdity and the damage caused by an abstinence-only rhetoric. We explore how our AAPI cultural influences, combined with the misogynistic sexual miseducation from the church, led to a unique brand of repression. But don't fret, dear listener. We also share how we found our way to a sex-positive mindset after breaking free.
Subscribe to this podcast by visiting dauntless.fm.